All right, we're about to dive into one of philosophy's most notoriously difficult thinkers. His ideas are, let's be honest, pretty challenging, and his language can be incredibly dense. But his diagnosis of our modern world is so sharp, so unsettling that it's just impossible to ignore.
The great physicist Niels Bohr said this about quantum mechanics, and it really captures a fundamental tension, right? When you're dealing with these incredibly complex realities, sometimes being perfectly clear means you have to sacrifice accuracy. You simplify it so much, you kind of lose the truth of it.
And that brings us right to our guy, because when it came to Martin Heidegger, a lot of his critics felt he pulled off a pretty unique feat. He was neither clear nor accurate. His work was often seen as this hopelessly obscure, tangled mess of jargon.
I mean, this is a man who gave a whole lecture on the nothing. It almost sounds like the setup to a joke. So you gotta ask, why should we bother listening? Well, because underneath that confusing surface, Heidegger offers his profound critique of our technological age that might be more relevant today than ever before. So to really get his critique of technology, we first have to wrap our heads around his very unusual take on what philosophy even is. And spoiler alert, it's not what most of us probably think it is.
So Heidegger would probably agree with you that you can't really do anything with philosophy. But then he'd flip the whole question. He'd ask, what if philosophy could do something with you? See, for him, it wasn't some tool for solving problems. It was more like a force that could fundamentally change your entire awareness of existence itself.
And what did Heidegger think philosophy should be doing to us? Well, he thought it should be waking us up to this massive crisis of meaning that, he argued, has been slowly building for over 2,000 years.
This right here is the absolute heart of his entire project. Heidegger looked at the 20th century and he saw a world where deep, real, sustaining meaning was just evaporating. He felt like we were becoming more and more out of touch with something essential, something we couldn't even really name anymore.
So this kind of lays out his 2,000-year historical argument. He said that our ancient pre-Socratic ancestors, they lived in a state of awe and wonder. But then Plato came along and shifted philosophy's focus to abstract ideas, to rationalism. And for Heidegger, that was the big turning point. That one shift set the West on this long, long path away from wonder and toward a desire for control, a path that he says leads directly to the tyranny of modern technology.
And that brings us to his main target. But when Heidegger talks about technology, he doesn't just mean your smartphone or your laptop. Nope. He means something much, much bigger, and in his view, way more dangerous.
For Heidegger, technology is really a way of seeing the world. It's like a lens we all look through that shows us everything, rivers, forests, animals, even other people, as what he called a standing reserve. It's all just raw material, a resource to be optimized, controlled, and stockpiled for whatever we want.
And this is the devastating consequence. This technological worldview doesn't just use the world, it totally changes our relationship to it. It strip mines the very meaning of things, leaving them as these empty resources, with no inherent mystery or worth of their own. A forest isn't a place of wonder anymore, it's just a stockpile of lumber.
The end game here is, well, it's pretty bleak. The world becomes a giant warehouse. And the most dangerous step is when we turn this lens on ourselves. We start to see ourselves as human resources, as biological objects to be hacked and optimized for maximum productivity. We get trapped in this cage of efficiency, right? Just chasing one short-lived satisfaction after another, but never finding any real, deep fulfillment.
So, if this technological way of seeing has caused this dwindling of meaning, what did that world we lost even look like? Heidegger gives us a couple of really powerful examples to give us a glimpse. Okay, first he talks about an ancient Greek temple. For him, this wasn't just some building, it was a focal point. It gathered an entire community, it defined their world, and it connected them to something mysterious and transcendent. Now contrast that with a modern church or museum. For a lot of us, it's just a tourist stop, right? A place to snap a photo. That shared sacred experience has been replaced by just individual observation. His second example comes from looking at a Van Gogh painting of old peasant shoes. He argues that in these simple, worn-out shoes, you can feel an entire world. A world of hard work, of direct connection to the soil, of worrying about the harvest. It's a life lived in a practical, unintellectual way, deeply rooted in the earth. A huge contrast to our complicated, disconnected lives.
All right, so if we go along with Heidegger's diagnosis that we're trapped in this technological worldview that stripped the world of meaning, what's the solution? Well, this is where he gets really challenging and frankly deeply counterintuitive.
So let's go back to that infamous lecture on the nothing. It sounds totally absurd, but it's actually the key to his entire prescription for our modern sickness. What on earth was he talking about?
The nothing isn't literal emptiness, and it's not just another word for, say, depression. For Heidegger, it's that quiet, nagging, background feeling that something essential is absent from modern life. You know that feeling? That underlying sense of groundlessness? The feeling that even when we have everything we think we want, something is still profoundly missing. That's the nothing.
And here's the crucial point. Most of our frantic, modern activity is just a distraction from that feeling. We talk a lot because we have little to say. We buy a lot of stuff even when we don't need anything. We are constantly moving, consuming, and producing, all to avoid confronting this quiet emptiness, this nothing that's sitting at the heart of our experience.
So what's his radical answer? It's pretty wild. It's essentially to do nothing. Step 1, just stop. Stop trying to solve the problem, stop trying to invent a new meaning. Step 2, instead of acting all the time, learn to simply undergo our experience, to be open to what's happening around us and inside of us. And then step 3, which is the hardest part, endure. We have to find the courage to face that feeling of absence directly, without trying to run away from it.
This quote really sums up his whole message for us today. In an age that is absolutely obsessed with productivity, with solutions, with control, Heidegger's most urgent advice is to wait, to be open, and to allow ourselves to fully experience the very absence we are so desperate to fill. Because it's only by enduring that void, he suggests, that a new kind of presence, a new kind of meaning, might finally have a chance to emerge.
And that leaves us with a really provocative question for our fast-paced, action-oriented world, doesn't it? When every single impulse we have is to check a notification, optimize our schedule, or solve the next problem, could we ever find the courage to do what Heidegger suggests and just wait?